Good morning, everyone that's joining us. We're happy to have you here. We're going to be getting started in a few minutes once everybody's managed to connect. In the meantime, if you want to let us know where you're from, that would be great. There should be a chat box option on your screen. And if you would just keep it on everyone so that we can all see where we're from. Thank you, Lisa. We got somebody from Richmond. Excellent. Good morning, Lisa. And Susie already has a question saying, is this going to be recorded? And yes, it is. This is being recorded, and I hope to share a link to the recording once it's been processed. All right. Good morning, Carol from Plainfield. And polls. And I'm also, while we're waiting just a few minutes, I'm going to launch a poll that we've established here on which invasive plant is your biggest problem. So you get to choose from 10. If you click the poll button, that should show up on your screen. And at some point, we'll look at that and discuss the results. But you are welcome to take the Your Worst Weed challenge while we're waiting. Okay, we've got votes for winter creeper and grass. We'll be talking about both of those today. All right. Well, I think we can get started. What we're going to do today, because unfortunately, this is the Monroe County Identify and Reduce Invasive Species 9th Annual Sustaining Nature and Your Land Day, Snail Day. It's always our biggest event of the year. And unfortunately, because we could not do it in person this time, we have taken the favorite part of Snail Day for most people, which is our weed lab, and brought it to you virtually. So that's what we're doing here today. We're going to give you a quick introduction to invasive plants. Most everybody on here, I'm sure, already knows what the issue is. And then we're going to get to the pictures and the questions that people uploaded in advance. We had about 37 registrants for this. So we got a number of interesting pictures and questions. And we are going to try to cover all of those in the next hour and a half, as well as give you plenty of time to ask your own questions. I want to introduce my cohorts here, my colleagues, my friends who are helping with Weed Lab. We have myself, Ellen Jacquart. I'm the chair of our Monroe County Identify and Reduce Invasive Species group. We have Mary Welz, who is the regional invasive specialist for this portion of Indiana with the Southern Indiana Cooperative Invasives Management Group and the Indiana Invasives Initiative. And we have Chris Neggers, who is with the Indiana chapter of the Nature Conservancy and is a forester here in Southern Indiana. And we'll be going back and forth, and this is intended to be fairly loose. If you have questions while we're going, put them in the chat box. And if we can't get to them while we're talking, we'll bring those up after our prepared content is finished and answer those questions for you. All right. With that, all I have to do is click here, and there we go. So first, what is MC-IRIS, the host group of this virtual weed lab? We are a partnership working to reduce the environmental and economic impact of invasive species in Monroe County through education and action. And we started 11 years ago when a whole bunch of partners in Monroe County came together to form this group. Now, invasive species, this is the federal definition for what an invasive species is. It's a non-native species that can cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. And that has two parts to the definition that I'm going to get into a little bit more. And just as an example of one, Asian bush honeysuckle is a picture on the left. And the picture on the right shows the environmental harm that it is causing by invading the understory of this forest. So, if you didn't know, Indiana has 2,865 plants, according to the Biota of North America Plant Project, North America Project. But out of those, how many are invasive? Feel free to come up with your mental guess of how many of those plants that grow out of cultivation in Indiana are actually invasive. Remember, invasive has two parts. It's got to be non-native, and it's got to cause harm. So the first part of that, non-native versus native species in Indiana, the green is native species in Indiana. The blue is non-native. So roughly 1/4, 25% of the flora of Indiana is non-native species. And that's about 685 plants. But if you look at how many of those non-native plants are actually causing harm, it's relatively few. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 species that we consider truly invasive. And I note this distinction because we got a lot of pictures of things that people thought might be invasive, and many of them turn out to be non-invasive, and in fact, some are actually good native plants. So with that, I'm going to go through some of the pictures, really all the pictures we got, we're going to go through. The first picture we got is this beautiful shot from Amy Deeds of the native running strawberry bush. It is a vine that covers the ground, and it's our native vining euonymus. And you can see it's got buds here. It's going to be flowering soon. So that's a great plant to have, and a nice native option to replace, say, a winter creeper, which is our invasive euonymus. We had 3 pictures from Danielle Green. On the left, we have the annual fleabane, which is native, but annuals by their nature tend to be kind of spready. They produce a lot of seed, and you can find a lot of this in your yard this time of year. Because it's an annual, it's fairly easy to control by simply pulling it before it sets seed. The center picture is the non-native peony. That's just a very young shoot of a peony plant. It's a great example of one of those species that it's not native, but it's not invasive. Peonies are not going to take over anything you've got. So this is a non-native peony. But the third species is a problem. The third species is periwinkle, Vinca minor. And it is an evergreen ground cover. And we are going to talk about the control of this specifically, but we're going to do that a little bit later. So of these 3, the only one that's really a problem is the periwinkle. We had some great pictures from Christy Lindberg. On the left, our take after discussing it is we think that that is lemon balm. The way to tell for sure, of course, is just take a leaf, crush it, smell it, and it should smell very lemony. On the right is a native sedge. There are dozens of native sedge species, all distinguished by the different fruits that they produce. Here are the fruits. This particular is Carex grayi, gray sedge, a wonderful wetland sedge that many people use in their landscaping because of the dramatic fruits. We have a couple of pictures from Beth Plew, somebody I got to meet last year when I did a survey of her land. That's something that Monroe County Identify and Reduce Invasive Species does for free for landowners in the county. So I went to Beth's yard and got to see the challenges she had with invasives. Well, she's shared a couple photos here. We've got on the left, that's native giant ragweed. Which is an annual again, and we all know ragweed can really cover areas, especially in farm fields, but it is a native that actually produces fruits that are beneficial to birds. And on the right, we have a non-curly duck. Rumex crispus can be easily, 12 inches long, and it's not native, but most would argue with calling it truly invasive. It tends to be more of a problem in farm fields or gardens. It doesn't really invade natural areas. It's one that can be difficult to get rid of. Often people will either dig it out because it has a significant taproot that will be very deep in the ground, or you can use an herbicide. We'll be talking more about using herbicides and so on further on in the show. So that's a non-native dock. Lori Day sent us a couple pictures. The one on the left is another dock with those big wide leaves, but we aren't entirely sure if it's curly dock or there are a couple of native docks as well. They can be species that will invade really disturbed areas, but it's up to you whether you want it in your landscaping or not. On the right, we have creeping Charlie, which is an invasive plant. And I'm gonna hand it over to Chris right now so that he can talk a little bit about how he controls creeping Charlie.
Yes, thank you, Ellen. I find creeping Charlie to be pretty interesting because at Snail Day, it tends to be one of the most common species we get questions about controlling. It's definitely a yard type weed, so turf grass is where most people are having problems with this, or mulch beds and flower gardens. Fortunately, it can be a very easy plant to control. In my yard, I have experience using chemical treatments to remove it from my turf grass. I used a broadleaf specific herbicide containing triclopyr, and did a treatment on it in the late summer, and with no ill effects to my grass and sedge that is growing in my yard, it completely removed the creeping Charlie from my turf grass. At last year's Snail Day, I had the good fortune to be next to another volunteer for MC Iris named Andy Mars, who has a lot of experience with treating this in gardens and mulch beds for his clients. And he actually finds it to be a fairly easy plant to control there. And something I learned from him is that creeping Charlie spreads with long horizontal running stolons. So very often it is encroaching into folks' gardens by running across the ground. And he devised or discovered a very easy way to control it by simply using a sharp spade or shovel and severing those stolons along the garden edging. And that cut the spreading parts off from where it was coming from, and it really reduced the creeping Charlie getting into folks' gardens. And that was also mentioned because some folks are doing a good job of managing invasive species on their side of the fence, but their neighbors are not. So they were getting continuous encroachment. And that severing method was a good chemical-free way to keep it out of folks' gardens. And he was quite a fan of it. It's just not one that I have experience with.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris. And again, if people have more questions about that specific control or anything else, we'll have time for discussion when we go through when we're finished with the prepared content. The next pictures we got, a couple nice pictures from Tamara Bain, and there is on the left, a native golden ragwort. So that is a native perennial plant with these bright yellow composite flowers. And on the right, beautiful picture of garlic mustard. Hard to miss that one. Many of us are very familiar with garlic mustard, those four-petaled white flowers. And what I'm going to do is now hand it to Mary Welz, because she has a lot of experience in controlling garlic mustard. Oh, and I'll mention, I'm about to show you pictures of garlic mustard from the new guide to invasive plants in Indiana. The guide to regulated terrestrial invasive plants species of Indiana has just come out in the last month, and there is a website shown here. It's on the Indiana Native Plants .org site, which is the site for the Indiana Native Plant Society. And it's available as a free PDF. And I think once you've seen some of the examples we're going to show you, you'll see why you're going to want to have this on your computer to call up. Here's the first page of the information on garlic mustard. And now I'll hand it to Mary so she can talk about it.
Thanks, Ellen. So garlic mustard is a plant that is very common in Monroe County, and it's got a few lookalikes, but it's pretty prevalent. Once you start seeing it, you'll get an eye for it. But right now it's in flower or in seed. But it's a biennial plant, so the first year it actually comes up as a basal rosette. So it's just this bottom layer of leaves that are kind of kidney shaped. The second year, it actually sends up a stalk that can get even up to 4 feet tall. I've seen it. And it will produce these flowers. It's in the mustard family, so that means the flowers will have 4 petals. That's a good way to tell a plant that's in the mustard family. And then once it's finished blooming, it produces these siliques, or long cylindrical seed pods, and that's where the seeds come from. And it's easy to spread those seeds just by walking around near garlic mustard infestations or spreading it in water or moving soil. And those seeds can persist for up to 3 to 5 years in the soil. So it's definitely one that keeps popping up. And yeah, we can kind of move along there. One other thing about garlic mustard, and one of the problems with it is it does kind of take over. It prefers shaded woodlands, moist shaded woodlands, and it will produce chemicals that will go down into the soil and suppress the growth of native plants. And it's pretty much just garlic mustard at some point if it's left unchecked. You can see those leaves that I was talking about. That's the first year leaves up top. They're very rounded and kidney shaped. And then once it flowers, those leaves kind of turn more triangular. And there are some similar natives that are in the mustard family. Some of our cresses, we have spring cress and purple cress. I did want to kind of point out that sometimes when people just see that basil leaf, they think it looks a lot like some of our native violets. Also, that picture doesn't really show the leaf, but the golden ragwort leaf also has kind of a rounded edge. And then one other species that it can be confused with is that creeping Charlie. So you can kind of see the resemblance there. But the teeth on those leaves are a little more pointed than most of those others. And there are some other white flowering plants. So when you're out, that bloom around the same time as garlic mustard. So make sure you know what you're pulling, because we do have plants like our sweet cicely, and there's one called a genus called corn salad, and that flower looks similar and they grow in similar conditions. So make sure you got the right ID, but garlic mustard is wonderfully easy to pull. Because it's a biennial, it doesn't have very large root system, and you can pull it anytime. And if you pull it when it's in flower or in seed, you need to actually remove the plant from site and eradicate it. If it is just the first year growth, you just want to make sure that when you remove it, the roots are no longer in contact with the soil so that it cannot continue to grow. You can use chemical control for garlic mustard. We recommend a 2 to 3% solution of glyphosate with surfactant. You can actually go down to 2%, but then you can, this plant will continue to grow after freezing, but after freezing, you need a little higher dosage of chemical. So that 3% is a safe bet any time of the year. Great.
Thank you, Mary. All right. The next picture came from Beth Gaisley, and I'm happy to say this is another really good native plant. This is native golden ragwort, Pachyra aurea. You may remember we did golden ragwort a little bit ago. That was round-leaved golden ragwort. The basal leaves lobate and round at the end. This has big heart-shaped leaves. It's our other perennial species of golden ragwort, and a great native plant that I use in my landscaping a lot. Another picture, this is a plantain. Many of us are familiar with the there are several plantains that grow in Indiana. Some are native, some are not native. Now this one I couldn't tell because those rocks are covering up what I need to see, but it's one of two species. If the base of the stem right here is reddish, it's Plantago rydellii, and that's Rydell's plantain, and it's native. If it is non-native, the one that stem base would be green instead. So take a look at those stems, Clark, and you'll know if it's native or non-native. Either way, if it's growing in your landscaping and you didn't intend for it to be there, just pull it. All the plantains are fairly aggressive in that they'll pop up in many places. They produce huge numbers of seeds that disseminate widely. Oh, and Angela Sturdivant sent in this picture of a plant in her backyard. I have this one too in my yard. It's pretty common in Monroe County. I believe this is our native spotted St. John's wort, Hypericum punctatum. There is another species of St. John's wort that you should worry about having, which is called common St. John's wort. I'm pretty sure by these leaves, this is the native, but if you wanted to be sure, when it comes into bloom, it will have yellow flowers, 5-petaled yellow flowers. Look closely at the flowers. If there are dark dots and streaks, basically black dots and streaks, sometimes kind of subtle, but they're there, and they're all over the 5 petals, that is the native. If only the dots and streaks are on the very margins of the petals, that is probably the invasive one, which is not common in southern Indiana. I haven't really seen it here, except in maybe one place. So that's a suggestion on that. But this being a native Hypericum, it doesn't need to be controlled. And now we get to some really interesting ones. So far on the poll is still going, and I think we've got quite a few votes for winter creeper, which is in this picture. You can still take that poll though and tell us what your worst weed is. This picture actually has 2 stacked invasive species, which happens. On top here we have Asian bush honeysuckle. Below that, we have winter creeper. I will talk about winter creeper a little later, but we're going to start with Asian bush honeysuckle because this is a very important invasive species for us in Monroe County. And I'm going to hand it to Mary to tell you why that is. And then she's going to we'll hand off to Chris, who's going to talk about the control. I am stopping sharing.
Can everybody see that?
I can.
Okay, great. So are you overwhelmed by all the invasive plants to identify and control on your property? You're not alone, and MC Iris wants to help focus your efforts. For each year, we commit to providing detailed information and offering management support for one type of invasive plant. In 2020, we are targeting Asian bush honeysuckle for control. So we're asking you to join in the Reduce 1 Invasive Species Challenge to remove Asian bush honeysuckle and receive a free native shrub in return. You need to take photos, ideally before and after photos or videos, and share these with us. So what is Asian bush honeysuckle? The scientific name for this genus of shrubs is Lonicera. They were introduced from Asia in the early 1700s to 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s. They were introduced as ornamentals and wildlife habitat, though they really do provide poor support for both. They were a poor choice. They're upright, shade-tolerant shrubs. There are several species. In Monroe County here, our most common species that we're gonna see is the amber honeysuckle. They have simple opposite leaves that are oval in shape, and opposite means that they're arranged oppositely on the stem. They have flowers that are tubular, and they can be white, yellowish, or pink. The berries range from red to orange, and there are, let me go through my pictures. The actual branches are arching, and they're gray or tan striped bark. So why is bush honeysuckle a problem? It grows in a variety of different types of growing conditions in both sun and shade. It forms dense thickets. It outcompetes native plants. It reduces our forest health. They contribute to soil erosion. They lower the diversity of our native plants, insects, and other wildlife. And they actually increase the risk of tick-borne illness, big one. And unfortunately, they're one of the most common shrubs in Indiana. So as part of the Reduce One Invasive Species Challenge, you can replace bush honeysuckle and get free native plants in return. And thanks for doing this. We'll be providing 4 different species currently: American plum, buttonbush, ninebark, and smooth hydrangea. And just to tell you a little bit about these quickly, American plum is actually a small tree or large shrub. It likes full sun but can tolerate part shade and prefers medium to dry soil moisture. It's a big one, so it's about 15 to 25 feet in height and spread. And it has very showy, fragrant white flowers in spring, and then produces these edible fruits in early summer. It also tolerates clay soils, which is a good one for Monroe County. It attracts bees, birds, and small mammals, so you might have to compete with the mammals for the fruit if you're interested in that. You would need to protect this species from deer when they are abundant. Buttonbush is another one of the shrubs we'll be offering. It is a small to medium-sized shrub. It prefers full sun and can take some part shade. It prefers wet to medium soil moisture, and it gets about 6 to 12 feet in height, a little and pretty similarly spread. It has very unique round white flower clusters in summer, very cute. And when those mature to seed heads, they persist over winter, and this species will tolerate occasional flooding. It attracts bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, and other insects and birds. Ninebark is also a small to medium-sized shrub. It prefers full sun and part shade. It likes medium to dry soil moisture, and it's a little smaller, 6 to 8 feet in height, and a little shorter in spread. It has showy white or pink flower clusters in spring or summer, and it has attractive bark, which kind of gives you that winter interest. It also tolerates drought and clay soils and attracts bees, butterflies, and other insects. This is another one where I would protect it where deer are abundant. And lastly, we have one of my favorite native shrubs, which is smooth hydrangea. It's a small shrub, smaller than the others, and it prefers part shade, and it blooms wonderfully in shade. It likes medium wet to medium to dry soil moisture, so very adaptable, and it only gets about 3 to 5 feet in height. It has very showy clusters of large white flowers, and later in the spring to early summer. And this too also tolerates drought and clay soils. It attracts bees, and it supports the larva of butterfly and other insects, not necessarily the larva, but other insects in general. So we just invite you to join in our Reduce One Invasive Species Challenge this year, and you can learn more and participate at our website. And keep a lookout for these trail signs that'll be popping up all over town to be able to see Asian bush honeysuckle in person and learn how to identify it.
Great. Thank you very much, Mary. And that last sign that she showed, that was designed by Mary, and it's really beautiful. So I think that's going to help us get the message out a lot. And now, Chris, do you want to talk to us about Asian bush honeysuckle control?
Definitely. Let me get my presentation up and going. So Mary mentioned the Reduce One challenge and the shrubs that you can get for participating in that. And I was going to talk about how to do Asian bush honeysuckle control with pictures that you will hopefully find very motivating. And we were going to start with a very heavy infestation. And as Mary mentioned, these plants grow very dense. It causes a lot of negative impacts to our ecosystems. The soil is bare. There's almost no native ground cover growing here. And your options when beginning with an infestation that is dense like this are really all about reducing the biomass of the shrubs out there. And my favorite methods are cut and treat with chainsaws, brush cutters, and that's actually what was done in this photo. If you look very closely, you can see some small stumps from the plants, but this infestation was so dense they didn't fall over after they were cut. You can also use hand tools if you would prefer, if you're not comfortable running a chainsaw or a brush cutter. You know, I have props today. You can use loppers. They work great. Smaller plants, you might get away with the little hand pruners. A hand saw is also very helpful in case you encounter the occasional one that's too big for your loppers. If you are preferring to go with a non-herbicide treatment, there are puller bars out there that will simply uproot the entire plant. If you're fortunate enough to have access to heavy equipment, you can also use that to uproot and remove the plants. But all of those treatments are geared towards reducing the size of the infestation, like making the plants smaller, getting rid of the biomass, and making it easier for you to get in there and do these follow-up treatments.
Chris, I have a question from Carol asking if you have a favorite brush cutter that you use.
So with the Nature Conservancy, we tend to use large steel brand power equipment, and Steel makes some very good brush cutters, which are heavy duty and very powerful. And when we are doing this type of work, that's what we tend to go with. I think they're the FS460 model. Our friends at Ecologic enjoy using the Shindawa brand brush cutters, but they're all very heavy and designed for regular, intense commercial use. I tend to use a chainsaw a lot because it's always with me in my truck when I need to go out and do some shrub control. So this photo that we're looking at now is what a dense infestation will look like after that initial treatment, where we cut the plants down and have treated the stumps with an herbicide to prevent resprouting. And this work was actually done as part of one of MC Iris's first Saturday work days last October, and is at Sherwood Oaks Park and the goat farm. And in the background, you can see the Jackson Creek Trail. So volunteers used chainsaws in this area and cut the plants down. All of the brush was left in place just to rot. And you can see some of it in the background of the photo. And you'll notice that native plants are starting to respond and are growing back. So this is a very dramatic step. It's a very fun step to do because the forest looks so different, and you've made a significant change. Now, one growing season later, things look different again. And this photo is also from Sherwood Oaks Park. It's on the other side of Jackson Creek Trail. And this area was treated 2 years ago, I believe. And what happens after that initial treatment is the seeds on the ground sprout back. Stumps that you may have missed sprout back, or small plants that you didn't cut and treat continue to grow. And this is a good time where you might start feeling sad or like all of your effort was wasted, but don't give up at this point. This is an incredibly important point to do a follow-up treatment. And the preferred method on lands that I manage is to do a foliar applied herbicide late in the growing season to kill the non-native shrubs. But if you are dealing with a small infestation, you can do more cut and treat. And your small little pruners like this are going to be a great size to deal with those small resprouts. Hand pulling can work too, because the plants are going to be very small. But whatever method you choose, just make sure that you get out there and do it, because a follow-up treatment is perhaps the most exciting thing to see the results of. And this photo is from the same wood line as the previous one. So this photo looked like the slide we were just looking at. And there are dead bush honeysuckle skeletons in the foreground. And you'll notice that there is a pretty good cover of native ground or native species on the ground. And not a single one of them was planted. The non-native invasive species were simply removed, and the native seed bank was allowed to regrow and express itself. So big changes can happen. It will take some work, and it might seem like you're wasting your efforts, but don't give up, because in the end, you can have a significant impact on the place that you're trying to manage and really make a difference.
Chris, we had a question about removal of plants, what to do with them, especially if you can't burn them if you're in city limits, so that they don't reroot, or just what do you do with all that brush?
Sure. And that is a particularly tricky question when we are talking about being in the city limits, especially of Bloomington. There is yard waste pickup, which is an option if you bundle it all together and put it out by your curb on your yard waste pickup day. The city will haul it away. Brush piles are also an option to consider, where you may just have to designate some area as where the brush goes and concentrate it all there, and then just monitor it for any resprouting or seed bank that pops up. And you can attempt to compost it there. The Good Earth mulch facility on the south side of town will accept it if you're able to load it up and haul it down there. And those are kind of the options available to us. I tend to use my loppers and cut my invasive shrubs up into little tiny pieces and put them into my campfire and roast marshmallows over them with the family.
We have a question about what herbicide you recommend after cutting them down. So maybe when you're treating the resprouts is what I think you mean, Clark. Does that sound right?
So that's an excellent question. My preferred herbicide is glyphosate, diluted 50-50 with water, and applied directly to the stumps a few minutes after cutting them. And you can use a small sprayer to do that, or a little dopper bottle, or even a sponge brush dabbed on there. And MC Iris has a great resource called the Calendar of Control, which we'll go over later. And that covers some of the recommended herbicides, their concentrations, and how to apply them.
And I have just put the link to the calendar of control that we're going to cover into the chat box. So you're welcome to go there and bring that up if you want.
Okay.
Carol, thanks, Carol. I was wondering about if they go through a chipper well. So I would say yes, if you have access to one.
If you have access to a chipper, definitely. A neighbor and I, a neighbor who happens to work for an arborist, brought home a chipper one weekend, and we chipped up a whole lot of non-native shrubs from his yard and our neighbor's yard.
The only caveat I would say is to avoid chipping them when they have berries on them, because if you reuse that, then you're just adding seed to your property as a mulch or whatever.
Yep, good point.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris. I think that's very helpful, and thank you, Mary. Certainly, if you're in Monroe County, I hope you take advantage of the Reduce One Invasive Species program or challenge and earn yourself a free native shrub. All right, now I'm going to share my screen again, and we found there's a time lag before you actually see it, so I'm waiting a little bit. Okay, hopefully now you're seeing back that picture of the Asian bush honeysuckle and invasive winter creeper. And what I'm going to do now is talk about the winter creeper part. Mary and Chris have covered the Asian bush honeysuckle. And actually, before I do that, I don't want to go too much longer, so I'm going to end the polling and I share the results. And I'm guessing that that just showed up on your screens, if that worked. And you'll see that winter creeper won for the unpopularity contest. Let's see who else. Japanese honeysuckle was second, and there were honorable mentions for multiflora rose, Asian bush honeysuckle, stiltgrass, and burning bush. So now I'm going to talk about winter creeper. And that out of the way. Okay, Chris just mentioned the calendar control, and I just gave you the link to it. We're putting this up here as a resource because I'm going to refer to it for a couple of different species. It gives you the how, the what, the when, the what, all of the details that you need for chemical control of invasive species. That's what this really focuses on. And here's the good news. We had questions about autumn olive and multiflora rose and privet and Japanese barberry. If you look at the calendar control, what you'll notice is that all of those species are controlled exactly the same way. So once you know what Chris just shared with you about the different treatment methods for Asian bush honeysuckle, you can apply those same methods to any other shrub that's invasive that you've got. And the way that this is read is, here's the species that are involved. This is the calendar of the year. It says foliar spray in an orange box. If you look for that, the key is at the bottom of the page, tells you that means you can use a foliar spray with 3% glyphosate and 1/4% non-ionic surfactant. You can do a cut surface treatment in purple from June through March. And cut surface treatment means the 50% glyphosate. That's what Chris was talking about, 50% herbicide, 50% water, and putting that on the cut stem. And there is a third method in blue, basal bark treatment. We probably won't go into detail on that here. It involves an oil-based herbicide that can be used for part of the year as well. So that's how this calendar of control works. And people find it very useful for timing when they want to control things chemically. Okay. Now, if you're saying, okay, I've got all the information, I now know what I need to do, but I lack some of the tools that Chris just mentioned in trying to control shrubs. In Monroe County, we have created Oh, thank you. That was good, Chris, bringing in the loppers. We've created 8 toolkits that include a soil knife, folding saw, pruners, loppers, and the really popular puller bear, which is a weed wrench that clamps around the base of an invasive shrub and allows you to lever it out of the soil. Those 8 toolkits are available on the MC Iris website, and you have to sometimes wait in line because it's turned out to be really popular, and most of them are out most of the time, but you can get on a waiting list for the toolkit that's closest to you in the county. So just wanted to let you know that resource for Monroe County residents, and feel free to use that. I've had a couple people who have borrowed the kit that I keep, who've said that they are now going to buy a puller bear, which is about $250. But for them, it is the method that they're most comfortable with, and they actually enjoyed pulling the Asian bush honeysuckle out of the ground. So it's a good way to also try some pricey tools to see if you really want to invest in one yourself.
Hey, Ellen.
Yeah.
Do you think there is a best time of the year to do hand pulling or using the puller bear to control non-native shrubs?
I do. Right now. This is the best time of year to me, because all that while you're looking for is soft soil. It gets harder when it's the soil gets tougher, especially here in southern Indiana where we have clay soil. It makes it much harder to pull anything out of the ground when it's dry. So wait for after a rain and focus pulling efforts if you can in the spring months before it gets so dry.
Great, thank you. Also, your slideshow is not full screen. We're getting to see your notes and preview.
Darn. Okay. Let me share a different screen. None of us are experts in Zoom. I hope you all understand that. Share screen. And how about this one? Is that better? Now I have to wait.
Perfect.
Yay. Okay, thank you, Chris. Okay, now remember that picture had Asian bush honeysuckle, which we've talked about, but the ground layer was winter creeper. I'm going to talk about winter creeper now because it's, I think, my winter creeper is a climbing vine. The pictures here are again from the new regulated guide to the invasive plants of Indiana. It has 4-parted flowers. Here you can see them. In many places in southern Indiana, it's blooming right now. If it's climbing, because only climbing vines can produce these flowers and these fruits. The fruits pop open in the fall in the same way that it's very closely related bittersweet does, to show a berry, orange berry in the middle, and the husk, the outside part is white. The leaves are evergreen, and they have teeth. It's hard to see on these pictures, but if you looked closely, you'd see a lot of tiny teeth all around the edge. That's really important when it comes to definitively identifying winter creeper. The similar species that is noted in the guide is the one we started with this morning, that great picture of the native running strawberry. And here it is in fruit. This is how it gets its name. That's a strawberry looking fruit. It's pink and warty, that then pops open to show an orange berry. And it generally doesn't have the white vine veins in the midrib. If you see the lighter colored midrib on winter creeper, that's very distinctive. That doesn't happen on the running strawberry vine. And the leaves are also obovate, that is, they're wider at the end of the leaf than at the side closest to the stem that it's attached to. Okay, let's talk about controlling winter creeper. We have a guide to this on the MC Iris website. The link to that is below. Basically, if you just go to mc-iris.org, you'll see on the toolbar there's invasive plant species with a drop-down list. And every one of those species, we have more information about its control if you click there. So you can go to there and get detailed descriptions of the 4 basic methods to kill winter creeper. 2 chemical, 2 non-chemical. If you're not comfortable using chemicals, pull it. It is time intensive. It takes several years, but basically you pull it, trying to get as many roots out of the ground as you can. There will still be resprouting, but over a period of years, you will reduce that winter creeper population. You can smother it, is the other non-chemical method. And by that I mean, you take big pieces of cardboard and you lay them flat on the winter creeper and you hold it down with 6 inches of mulch and you let it sit for a year. And in that year, the cardboard will smother the winter creeper and the cardboard will start to break down, so that after a year, you simply can plant new species into the mulch that you had layered, or the wood chips that you layered on top of that cardboard. It's pretty effective, but it means having access to really big pieces of cardboard, and it means having flat ground where you can nail that down to the ground essentially. If it's on a slope, it's not going to work well because all the mulch is going to fall off. If it's in a floodplain, all of that wood chip, it's all just going to go downstream at the first flood. So it's not going to work everywhere, but for some people, this is a very effective non-chemical way to control it. The other 2 ways involve chemicals. For the vines that are big and climbing up a tree, saw through that vine and treat the cut surface with the 50% glyphosate that Chris had already talked about. If you have a population on the ground or the vines are very, very small, cutting each one and painting them is really tedious. Most people use a foliar spray, and the preferred chemical for winter creeper is triclopyr rather than glyphosate. Triclopyr appears to be much more effective when spraying winter creeper. And I'll go now, let's see. We'll look at the calendar of control on that in a minute. What I want to do now, after just giving you the description of those 4 methods, is compare winter creeper to the other 3 evergreen vines we've got. And we got question on all of these. So I want to compare the winter creeper we just looked at to periwinkle. Remember that picture? Purple flowers. Note that the leaf margin is smooth. That distinguishes it from winter creeper. Also, periwinkle stays on the ground. It does not climb trees, can't climb. So it's only on the ground. And it doesn't have the white midrib or the lighter colored midrib that winter creeper does. The middle picture is English ivy. Most people, that's a fairly familiar looking thing. It has lobed leaves, no teeth, but big lobes on it. It's a climber. And then Japanese honeysuckle, which is more a semi-evergreen. Some of the leaves fall off, some of the leaves stay on. It has smooth margins, and it has these paired white to yellow flowers this time of year. So those are 3 similar vines to winter creeper, and the good news is, if you know how to control purple winter creeper, the same methods will work for these 3. And I'll show you that by looking at, here's the calendar of control. All those 4 vines have essentially the same methods. These 3 that are true evergreens use the red box treatment after first frost through the dormant season, very effective when the temperature is above 50 degrees. And that, if you go to the color code, that's using triclopyr and a non-ionic surfactant. Japanese honeysuckle, glyphosate is suggested. The foliar spray in orange is 3% glyphosate and non-ionic surfactant. It's essentially a less waxy leaf, so it's easier to kill, and glyphosate can be used. The key is the calendar part here, that during this time, these evergreen vines are showing their Achilles heel. They're out there in evergreen while the native plants are dormant. So you can go ahead and spray without impacting the native. We did get a question, a specific question, this was from Angela, that I thought was a good one. What if you've got Japanese honeysuckle or one of the other evergreen vines going through a shrub that's a good shrub you want to keep? How do you kill it? Well, first, if possible, if the shrub is dormant in the winter, you're able to spray the honeysuckle that is on the shrub without harming the shrub. Spraying a glyphosate solution on the woody bark of shrubs will not harm the shrub. It cannot be taken in through that bark. The other option is a little strange, but it can work. The plastic bag option. So if you've got, and this is sometimes used with bindweeds as well. If you're familiar with bindweeds in a garden setting and they've wrapped all around your perennial plants, you unwind carefully without breaking the vine. You unwind it, you ball it all up together, and you stuff it in a plastic bag. And then you spray your 3% glyphosate into the plastic bag and just close it up. So the plant is still connected to the ground. It's going to take in that herbicide and translocate it to its roots, killing it. But by putting it in the plastic bag, you're avoiding getting the chemical on anything else that might be out there. So that's a method you could use even when there were leaves on shrubs or the ground, because you're containing the herbicide.
Hey, Ellen?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
We have a question from Lynn asking if this dormant season spraying will hurt ferns.
Good question, Lynn. If the ferns are green, yes. And we do have some evergreen ferns, including Christmas fern and let's see, marginal shield fern are evergreen. So that's the rule of thumb. If the green tissue is there, herbicide touching it will harm it. If the leaves are all brown, it will not harm the plant. Okay. All right, so those were winter creeper. Oh, it's time for a commercial break. So one other program that we are launching today is the Love Our Land competition. And this is for everyone, for all students, 1st through 12th grades in Southern Indiana. It is an online art contest. What we're asking students to do is translate the issue of invasive species into art. It can be writing, it can be poetry, it can be dance, music, visual arts. We're collaborating with the Greater Bloomington Arts Alliance on this, and they'll be part of the judging. We're also collaborating with the Herald Times. This will be featured in the paper tomorrow. And submissions are due by June 30th. So if you've got a student in Southern Indiana, the website is shown there. There's also a map showing how we define Southern Indiana. Please let people know about this. We'd like to get lots of applications. And it's a way just to get kids to learn more about invasive species and then help translate that into ways that people can better, that we can use to have people better understand the invasive species issue. Okay, that was the fun part. Now we get to one of the worst invasives. And I believe I was going to talk about stiltgrass, and then I'll be handing it over to Chris so he can talk about control of it in the forest setting. Stiltgrass is a really annoying invasive, perhaps the most obnoxious one I know, because it will pop up everywhere. It is able to completely dominate the understory of a forest, as you see in this picture. And we have places in Monroe County that look like this. There are no trees, baby trees left, there are no ferns, there's nothing but stiltgrass. The flowers are very small, and on the end of the leaf stem, this will emerge in like late August into September. So very late blooming, and then it produces tiny, tiny seeds that are easily spread on boots and tires. The way to identify it by leaf is the leaves are shorter and broader than most other grasses, which tend to have longer, narrower leaves. And the center stripe tends to be silvery. It is also off-center. So most plants are very symmetrical in their leaves. If you look at stilt grass, the midrib is off to one side just a little bit, and that's unusual in a grass. It is a prostrate grass, meaning that it first starts out growing up, and then the branches fall down and they root at the nodes. And so one plant just gets bigger and bigger and bigger as the summer goes on. There are some native similar looking grasses like white grass, but if you look at the shorter, broader leaves and the off-center midrib and the shiny midrib, they're fairly easy to tell apart once you have a handle on that. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Chris and have him talk about the control that he does for Japanese stiltgrass.
Thanks, Ellen. There was a question that popped up in the chat from Angela Sturdivant about if cut stump treatment will work on Japanese honeysuckle, if she can trace it back to just a few rooted vines.
Absolutely, it will. The challenge is they're so skinny. Japanese honeysuckle is one of those vines that never gets all that big in diameter. So most of the vines you see are like a millimeter in diameter, and it's just hard to find and treat. But if you can, yes, that should be effective.
So to talk Japanese stiltgrass control in forests or natural areas, there's some things you can do before you go out and mix up herbicides, some cultural practices that would just stop the spread. So having clean machines coming onto your land, clean boots, clean animals. If you have a dog that enjoys playing in the mud, maybe clean him off before he comes into your forest. So you aren't bringing in new seeds. And that's not just a good idea for stiltgrass, it's a good idea to stop the spread of all invasive species. So if you can do that, implement it, then plan out your strategy for controlling stiltgrass, where you're sort of working in a top-down fashion, from a top of a hill, the top of a watershed, if we're talking a large scale, and then progress it down to the bottoms, down to a creek, down to a field edge, down to a road. And in my forests, we're dealing with hundreds of acres infested with stiltgrass, and the only practical option to treat something that big is chemical treatment. And we have tried several different chemicals over the years, from 2 different grass-specific herbicides, and are now tending to use glyphosate to treat stiltgrass. And glyphosate is a very inexpensive herbicide. It makes it affordable for us. It's a very safe herbicide compared to other options out there. And we've discovered that at low concentrations sprayed on stiltgrass, you can still kill that plant and leave some native species unaffected. And this is about as exciting as it gets when it comes to stiltgrass control, because we're using a commonly available, affordable herbicide that is not killing everything that we spray. So low concentrations, I'm talking 0.5% or even 1/4% volume to volume sprayed on Japanese stiltgrass. This plant does not have a big root system and is actually really easy to kill. And that's one reason it's so susceptible to this low concentration. And at those low concentrations, again, 0.5% or 1/4%, I'm seeing that some trees might get a little scorch, but are largely unaffected. Some ferns are unaffected, but the stiltgrass is just dead. So if you're thinking about doing this in a natural area or a small patch of woods near your house, consider doing that. If you're going to go the chemical route, if you're dealing with a small acre of woods and it has some stiltgrass in there, that's the scale at about, or that I would feel comfortable still doing a manual treatment of pulling, but would be concerned about increased soil disturbance, and definitely recommend bagging and trashing Japanese stiltgrass if you're going to do a hand pulling method. I've also found that adding seed to freshly disturbed soil in the forest from road work or other activities is a great way to just add something native that can outcompete this stiltgrass. And standard seed mix that we use in the forests I manage is switchgrass, native wild rye, and some partridge pea, which was a recommendation taken from the Hoosier National Forest, and it works very well and gets something out there that can outcompete it. So keep your machines, your boots, your animals clean so you're not bringing new stuff in. Work from the top down. If you're going to use herbicide, consider using a low concentration of glyphosate. There are grass-specific herbicides available that work quite well too. And if you can, maybe add some seed to freshly disturbed soil to give something that can compete against this species.
Great.
Oh, and I have a confession to make.
Yeah.
I have this species growing in my yard, and it bothers me to no end. But control in turf grass is a completely different animal, which I think Ellen is going to talk about.
I am. Thank you, Chris. That's really good, helpful information. And for us in Monroe County, this stiltgrass has moved in and dominated a lot in the last 10 years. And so many of us are scrambling for ways to deal with it. So let's see, go to the next slide. And this is our last slide, and then it's going to be open for discussion and other questions and showing us any weeds you have. Turf. This is my lawn. Laugh if you will. This is it. The blue is marking a plot that I established to do some test treatments on stiltgrass. Now, if you're good, you can see the stiltgrass in this. Right here, all these short bluish green leaves, short broad leaves, that's the stiltgrass. You'll notice that my lawn has a lot of violets and dandelions, and I don't care that much about my lawn. So a few years ago, I started trying different things to kill the stiltgrass, but not the rest of the turf. And I could not find anything that worked. I used glyphosate at the 0.00125% level, and it still killed most of the turf grass that was in there. Turns out that these species of turf grass appear to be sensitive to at least the surfactant, the soap-like surfactant that's in there. Maybe that's what killed it at that low level. But I was getting these brown spots on my yard that really weren't going to work. So a friend, I heard about this herbicide, and a friend used it last summer in Bloomington, and he said it worked perfectly. It killed the stiltgrass and did not touch his turf grass at all. And while I love the violets and so on, I draw the line at having stiltgrass in my yard because, like Chris, it drives me crazy. And I know that now when I'm walking over that, I may be picking up seeds and hauling them somewhere else. And I don't want to do that. So this summer, this is what I'm going to do. First, just so we're all clear, mowing does not get rid of stiltgrass. It produces fruit right at ground level, so there's no way to get rid of that production of seed. There is a chemical called phenoxyprop p-ethyl. It is a specialty herbicide that is for crabgrass. It is sold under the trade name Acclaim or Acclaim Extra, and you can buy it online from a lot of different sources. Or you can buy it locally at Lowe's or Home Depot as the Bayer Crabgrass Killer for Lawns. It's the same, just look for that name in the active ingredient on the label. You apply that at the label rates, and it will kill the stiltgrass and any crabgrass you've got without harming turf grass. So I'm hoping this is something that works well for me and for others, because we're finding it a growing problem in Monroe County. And more information on controlling stiltgrass, if again you go to our website, the drop-down menu and choose stiltgrass, there's some more information about, there's even a special calendar there for which method you can use to control stiltgrass through the year. Okay. And with that, it is 11:10, and we'd like to just open it up now to all of you. If you've got questions that haven't been addressed yet, if you've got species that you have in hand and you want to hold up so that we can see them and try and identify it remotely, the floor is open to everybody.
Ellen, really quickly on that crabgrass control for stiltgrass, is that a foliar application or a pre-emergent application?
It is a foliar. It's a foliar. So you're spraying your lawn in June, July, August, essentially. Good question. Okay.
So Eliza has a plant that she would like to identify and hold up. So if you unmute yourself, Eliza, that'll put you up center of screen so we can all see.
Okay, did I unmute myself? Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm holding this up, but I can't see myself on here, so.
Ellen, you got to stop screen sharing.
Hold it up a little. Oh, thank you. Where's that? Here we go.
I'm not sure if this is another species of dogwood or whether it's an invasive plant. The leaves are kind of toothed, they're jagged. It has four white blossoms. I don't see a yellow on the inside, so I don't think it's the autumn olive. And I think those petals are smaller. So it's a tree in my backyard.
How big of a tree?
It's getting there. I mean, it's either a tree or shrub, but it's large. I mean, it's probably at least 6 feet.
Can you turn it? Can you push it? Yeah, closer. There we go. Oh, there we go. My preliminary guess is a mock orange. I could be wrong on that. Does it have 4 petals, Eliza?
Yes, it does. This is. You see that one? I think
Yeah.
one off. Yes, they're
And
large.
opposite leaves? Are the leaves opposite across from each other?
The leaves are exactly. Yeah, they are exactly opposite each other.
Perfect. That is mock orange.
Mock orange. Okay.
Mock orange is a really it's a lovely non-native shrub. One of the early ones that was introduced in ornamental landscaping, like early 1900s, does not tend to spread at all, and it's got, I think, a lovely fragrance. I grew up with mock orange in the yard, and so I've always kind of liked it. So not native, but not invasive.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Thanks for being our first person to test the plant ID over Zoom, too.
Oh, sure.
Let's see. Other questions, things that came up that you wanted to ask more about on any of the species that we talked about? Or did we not talk about a species that you're struggling with that you'd like us to go into a little more detail?
One thing, Eliza had a few questions about the polar bear versus the weed wrench. So you have the most experience with those, Ellen, so I thought you might, and from what I understand, the weed wrench is no longer for sale. Is that correct?
That's correct. The weed wrench was like the original model. It was bright orange, and county parks and city parks will still loan those out. They've had them available for landowners for years, but they went out of business about 5 or 6 years ago, and the new companies came into being. And polar bear is one of those. that's almost the same as the weed wrench, but they're white instead. There's also the uprooter is another name of one, and the extractigator. So those are probably the three big brands. They're all in Canada. The uprooter, I've tried both the extractigator and the polar bear, and I like the polar bear better. I think it's easier to use, and I think it weighs a little less than the extractigator, which is even heavier than the old weed wrenches. So we ended up getting 8 polar bears for our toolkits, and they are incredibly popular.
Are there?
You're still on mute, Eliza. Did you want to ask another question on that? Let me see if I can.
Is the polar bear the same size as the weed wrench? Because I found the weed wrench really easy to use, but I was just curious if it was the same size.
They make it in different sizes. So there's the largest size, and then there are a couple of smallers, and then there's one, their Pro XL 125 is the big size, and it has a cotter pin, so you can change the clamp diameter for whatever the size of shrubs you're mostly dealing with is.
Well, what size do you rent? Which size polar bear do you offer people?
The biggest. Because
Okay.
the bottom line is, if we go with a smaller one, the clamp size then is smaller, and it means that you can only get a shrub up to 2 to 3 inches at the diameter at the base, and that's pretty small. So,
Okay, so the polar bear that you offer is the large one, if you were to get
Yes.
it? It's the large. Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Carol, did you have a question?
I just wanted to know how heavy they were. We have one at the Learning Center, and it's a beast, and it's so heavy. You know, for me to drag around through the woods, I can't do it.
It's heavy. There's no way around it. I mean, it's got to be 40 pounds, right? And for your setting, the Avon Outdoor Center, where you do amazing work on invasive control, it'd be hard because it's a very big area and you're humping that thing all over the place. I think it makes a little more sense if you're in a yard setting and it's all within a few hundred feet of the garage and you don't have to carry it so far. But it's not, I don't see it as viable for a place where you're covering acres of ground. It's just too heavy.
Yeah, we have 2 of them, and we had high school kids, and we handed the high school boys these things, and they had a blast. I was happy with that, but yeah, I can't do that.
Yeah, it's good for Boy Scout troops, for those kind, yeah, people who want to show their muscles, but you've got to really want to do that.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Ellen, it looks like we have a question in chat about how to eradicate lesser celandine from Mary Hoffman.
Mary, that is a tough question. I do not have a definitive answer. I've tried a few things, but I'm still learning about that species. It seems to be like many of the bulb plants, like lily of the valley or scilla or English bluebells, that are very hard to kill because the bulb has so many resources, it just keeps causing them to resprout. I know, Chris, that you said you had done some control of lesser celandine in your yard. Wasn't that the case?
Yes. So I live on the south side of Bloomington near Sherwood Oaks Park. And I believe deer had carried up some soil or some bulbs of lesser celandine to my yard. And last spring, I discovered around a 4 by 4 foot patch of lesser celandine growing in turf. And it got me pretty excited in a bad way. So I mixed up a backpack sprayer with a 3% solution of Garlon 3A, and the active ingredient in that is triclopyr amine, and then added a 1/4% solution of Milestone, which is an herbicide containing aminopyralid. and sprayed it in mid-April. And I mixed the two because Garlon is a very quick-acting herbicide that is broadleaf specific, so pretty safe for turf, and burns things down really well and really quickly. The Milestone is a slower acting systemic herbicide with plant hormone inhibitors in there, and it translocates through the entire plant and just stops it from growing. So we were going to burn it down and then stop it from resprouting. That was my thought. So I sprayed it, and then it got mowed, and lesser celandine is annoying because it pops up in late winter and early spring and then disappears by summer. Right, Ellen?
Yes, it does. Correct.
So I sprayed it, and I had no idea if it worked or not until this year. And this spring, there are no signs of lesser celandine in my yard. It's completely gone. Now, Garlon 3A is labeled to spray next to and over water. It is an aquatic safe herbicide, which is great because lesser celandine grows in these riparian habitats next to water and streams, but Milestone can only be sprayed up to the water's edge. So I think we're all trying to figure out a way to have a powerful herbicide that can stop this plant and its bulbs, but also not impact water quality too. And my 4x4 foot test, very far away from water, worked well.
It's an increasing concern in Bloomington specifically. Lesser celandine is sort of patchy in its distribution in the state, but Bloomington seems to have most of it. Jackson Creek in particular that goes through Bloomington is just covered. I mean, acres and acres, as far as you can see under the forest canopy, is bright yellow in late April when it's in bloom, mid-April when it's in bloom. And it's really devastating because it grows so thickly. I was testing control methods in a landowner last spring, and he was saying he'd lived on Jackson Creek for the last 10 years. And in that 10 years, he watched lesser celandine come in, just a small patch like Chris was talking about in his yard. And then the next year doubled in size and doubled and doubled. And what used to be really diverse habitat with all kinds of spring ephemerals, I saw it last summer and all that's there is lesser celandine. Everything else is gone. So it's a real concern, and we're all struggling to figure out the best way to control it. But Chris's mix of Garlon 3A, essentially a tricloperamine, and Milestone seems to be a good way to try. Oh, and Mary has put in the chat box the reported distribution map. Thank you. If you're not familiar with the EdMaps links that Mary has been putting in there, it's how we report invasive plants, and we've really been asking people to report lesser celandine because we think it's really underreported, because like Chris says, it disappears. Right now it's yellowing, and in a few weeks you won't even know it ever existed. So you have to be out there at the right time to notice it. And we're trying to get a better handle on just how widely distributed it is across Indiana. Okay, any other questions from the folks we have on the Zoom call? All right. Well, I think then I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to thank Chris and Mary for doing our first ever virtual Weed Lab. I really had fun, and I hope you guys did too. And thanks for all the good questions, and we hope that this has been helpful for you. And I will say goodbye and turn off the meeting.